Welcome to podcast number 4 at Indie Pub News with Michael Gallagher. Today, we are very happy to welcome Hollywood screenwriter and best-selling novelist David Lee Corley. Get ready for a glimpse of not only a Hollywood scriptwriter's secrets, but also a peek at how a nomadic writer paints a matchless visual landscape in his novels. Luckily for Corley, he writes fast and can tickle the Amazon algorithm several times a year. His most recent release, Cafe Wars, an epic war novel, Book 2 of the Airmen series, boasts a number 1 new release banner on Amazon in the biographies of the Air Force category. Earlier this year, Stealing Thunder, a military thriller, Book 3 of the Nomad series, hit the ground running in July, replete with startling images and snappy dialogue. Corley would especially love to interact with new readers about their reviews. Pick up, read, and review your copies while they're hot off the presses. Welcome, David Corley. A nomadic writer's unsettling realism is the subject of this interview tonight.
How you doing, Michael?
Oh, I'm doing great, thanks. Could you talk a little bit about your path to becoming a novelist, or as you call yourself, a nomadic writer?
Sure, happy to. I started off writing probably a little bit late in life. I started about 28 years old, somewhere around there. And I did everything kind of backwards in my career. I actually started off writing in Hollywood as a screenwriter. And what I did was I wrote about 5 screenplays over a fairly short period. And then after the 5th screenplay, I moved myself and my family, to Hollywood. Actually, I moved to Pacific Palisades in Southern California, which is close to Hollywood. And I started to try to, sell my screenplays and also try to get jobs as a screenwriter. And I kept writing all that time. And
how did you survive when you're doing that? Money-wise,
Well, I actually had, I was pretty good at business, and I had several companies that I owned. And I had, what happened is when I decided to go to Hollywood, I sold almost everything that I had, as far as companies go. I sold them off, but when I got to Hollywood, I decided that I needed a new business to support myself and my family, especially living in Pacific Palisades. So I started a company called Viewpoint Digital, which was an editing company. It was new at the time. It was there were these computers called Avids, which were editing systems, basically digital editing systems. And I started buying those systems and renting them out. And I would rent them out to the studios and also to producers and directors. They were basically for editing motion pictures and television.
Oh, I see. Okay, can you come back to your screenwriting stuff?
Yeah, so anyway, I took about a year, and as luck would have it, I got a gig writing a screenplay for Sony. They hired me to rewrite several other screenplays that had been based on a book called Weapon by Robert Mason. And I was lucky enough to be picked out between, there were about 20 writers up for the gig. And it just so happened I got picked.
Boy, that was good luck.
That was really lucky, let me tell you. That doesn't happen. The odds of actually getting a screenplay made in Hollywood, just in case anybody's curious, are less than 1%. So if you write a screenplay and you want to have it made into a movie, the odds are less than 1% that it's going to happen. Because movies are expensive, and they don't make, I think the Writers Guild has about 40,000, maybe it's 50,000 members. And all of those members are writing screenplays, spec screenplays all the time. And only about 500 of those, less than 500. I think now it's probably, when I started it was about 500. Now it's probably half of that actually get made into movies. So, if you just do the math, if there's like 40 to 80,000 screenplays by Writers Guild members, and that's not including everybody else in the world, because that's a fairly select group. If you just start doing the math, you realize that very, very few screenplays get made. So I was lucky. I got a gig to write a screenplay, and when I was writing the screenplay, as we were going along, it just turned out again that the project got green-lighted. And so they actually made the movie. And so the very first thing I ever did was this action movie. It was a sci-fi action film called Solo. That's the final name of it. And it got turned into, one of the, I think it got released to about 800 movie screens in the United States. And thousands and thousands of movie screens all over the world. And it was not a big hit. In fact, it made money, but it didn't make very much money, so it was kind of a disappointment. But it was my first project. And just because I did that, there were other people that were interested in me. I ended up writing, during my time as a screenwriter, I ended up writing 24 screenplays. 7 of which got produced into motion pictures.
Well, did you ever have anybody? Really exciting to work with, Hollywood-wise?
Hey, everybody was exciting. I mean, it was Hollywood.
I seem to recall some Van Damme in one of the names you were.
Yeah, that was actually the last movie I made. Jean-Claude Van Damme was the star of it. And that was actually, I actually had stopped writing at that point, and it was one of those projects that I had written, it was in my backlog, and again, it was Sony Pictures got into a jam. Apparently Van Damme was slated to be in this movie that they had, and when they did the rewrite on the movie, he didn't like it. So he rejected the project, and I guess he had a right to do that. Usually there are some rights that the stars have, and he rejected it, and he said, I'm not doing this. And as it turned out, he had read a screenplay that I had written with a friend of mine called Second in Command. And he had read that before, and he said, hey, I don't want to do the project you've got, but I read this one, and I really like it, and if you guys will do this one, I'm in. I'll stay in the project. So Sony, usually what happens when you sell a screenplay is that a studio or a producer will option the screenplay first. And so they'll give you money for an option. They will then rewrite the screenplay the way that they want it, and they either have you do that, usually they have you do the first shot at it, take the first shot at it, or they'll have somebody else do it. And then what happens is if they like the screenplay and they greenlight the project, they then pay you another pile of money to buy the screenplay. Then, once the movie's made, you start getting residuals. And residuals, I've been in cases where residuals for my movies were more than the money that the studios paid me. So you get these residuals that go on for, I still get residuals off all of my movies. and it's like 20 years ago. So I still get checks like every quarter from each one of my movies.
Boy, that's nice. That's a nice situation.
It is.
I see in your writing, I see the visuals, and I get shivers of anticipation when I remember that trip through the steamy jungle on the way to the orangutans. What do you do to keep your images and writing so fresh?
Another good question. Like I say, I'm kind of different than most writers in the sense that I started off as a screenwriter. So when I write or when I build a story, I see it as a movie. So I see each scene, and all I'm really doing is just describing what I'm seeing. I'm not thinking about, I need the character to do this and that, and I'm not thinking about character arcs. I'm not doing any of that. I'm just saying, okay, here we've got a guy, and he's, the hero is riding up the river into a jungle, and I just start describing, like, what is the boat like? What is the water like? What does it sound like? And I just start describing all of that stuff with as much detail as I feel is necessary. One of the big differences between writing a screenplay and writing a novel is that in a screenplay, you have very little description, because a screenplay can only be about 120 pages. That's kind of the max that a screenplay can be, somewhere between 90 and 120 pages. And so you have to be very brief in your descriptions. And the other big difference in a screenplay versus a novel is you have to you only have two options. You can see it or you can hear it. So you can't write anything where the character is thinking this, or it smells like this. You have to limit yourself to those two senses. And so what happens with me is I write like I used to write when I wrote screenplays. So everything I write, you're either going to hear or you're going to see it. So my visuals are, I would say, a little bit different than a lot of writers in the way that I approach it. It is a different style. I mean, it's one of those things. What I find is that people that read my books either love them or hate them. And I've been lucky that it's been more on the love them side. But some people just read my style and just go, ugh, I can't stand it. Whereas
I find it's dialogue driven often too. It's not only visual; it's the dialogue is really strong in your work.
Oh, thanks. I actually think, it's funny. I actually think that action is, for me, what drives a character. A person can say a lot of different things, and you don't know if that is the character or it's just what the character is saying. But a character's action is truly what drives home who they are. So when I write, yes, dialogue is very important, and I try to make it as natural as possible. But I also really try to describe the character by what they're doing. I put them in situations that define them. And then the dialogue just kind of plays out, as I write it. I don't get fancy with it. I don't rewrite my dialogue very much. I pretty much, what you read is what I wrote originally. I don't rewrite a lot.
What about that scene when your nomad Billy was on the lam in North Africa? Did you have some kind of life experience of your own in that location?
Yeah, I did actually. When I was a nomad for about 4 years, and what happened is I sold everything I owned. At that point in my life, I needed a sabbatical from work, so I took about 4 years off. And I traveled around the world. I went around the world 3 times. And I went to about 56 different countries. And all of those countries that I went to are now ending up in my stories in one way or another. I tend to write international stories, not domestic stories, although I have nothing against domestic stories in the United States. But I tend to write more, everything I've written so far has taken place overseas. And in that particular case, which was the book Prophecies of Chaos, Billy and his heroine and love interest are on the run, and they end up going to Fez, Morocco. And I had been in Fez, and I loved it. It was absolutely one of the coolest places I've been. I mean, it was a real eye opener. That and Marrakesh.
Yeah, in Fez,
the
stuff in Fez, the descriptions are just amazing. I felt like I was inside the places you were talking about.
Yeah, well, the good thing about Fez is it is really visual. I mean, you go there and it's this other world. I mean, it's these these winding alleyways and there's a lot of like smoke and sunlight coming through thatched roofs and things like that. I mean, it's really a fascinating place, and it looks so much different than say Europe or any place in America. So yeah, visually, I mean, Fez was just a really cool place, a lot of fun to write. And I actually, one of the places that I wrote about, Riyadh, was a Riyadh that I actually stayed in. And so when I described it in the book, I wrote down, what it actually looked like. I had taken, when I traveled for those 4 years, I took about 85,000 photographs, and I shot about 3,000 videos. And so whenever I write now, and I decide, okay, I want to write something in Fez, Morocco, I just go back and I look at all of those photographs, and that's what helps me remember, what it was like there and the feelings that I had.
Well, it sure comes out in your writing that you've been to the places. The images are so strong. I wonder if you could.
Oh, thank you.
I wonder if you could recount one particularly poignant location or experience that inspired a scene in your newest work, Cafe Wars.
Ooh, boy. Yeah, Paris, for sure. Paris is probably my favorite city in the world. And I think the reason it is because it's really over the top. But it has French style. And so even though it's over the top, the French get away with it. Because they really do have a really good sense of style. So where you would see, gilded, golden statues, and you would think, oh boy, that's really gaudy. The French get away with it. I mean, it really works. So, but yeah, there were actually tons of scenes. Cafe Wars is about the cafe wars that happened in, I think they happened in about 1954 through 56 was the majority of them. And cafe wars were basically when 2 underground rebel groups from Algeria, it was during the war of independence for Algeria against France, but there were 2 underground groups that went to war with each other, kind of a little mini civil war. And instead of it playing out in Algeria, they tried to kill each other in Paris. And the way they did it was they would plant bombs and they would do drive-by shootings and things like that. So, and what they focused on was what's called cafe culture, which is that the Parisians love to sit in these sidewalk cafes, smoke cigarettes, and at that time they smoked cigarettes, and drink their coffee. And everybody did it. It was, it was just kind of a relaxed fun way to, watch the world go by. And what happens in the book is the characters would come to one of these cafes, and somebody would plant a bomb there, and it would blow up, and not only would it kill, the target that they were aiming for, but it'd kill like 10 other Parisians. And this went on, like I say, for 2 years. There were like 5,000 Parisians that were killed during the cafe wars. So I drew the main characters of the book spend a lot of time in Paris as one of them is investigating, what's going on. And so there's a lot of opportunity for this character to sort of walk around, and as she does that, I describe, what Paris is like. And it's, again, a very visual city. I try to find visual locations when I write, things that people haven't seen before, which is one of the things that I really try to do is tell stories that haven't been told before in places that haven't been seen before, although there's a lot of stories about Paris. But I try to include in everything that I write at least 3 or 4 locations that are very visual that you probably have not heard a lot about. So in Monsoon Rising, it was the islands of southern Thailand, and the piers in Malaysia, in Georgetown, Malaysia. They're called jetties, the Chinese jetties. And then, of course, the scene you were describing, which was the jungles in Borneo. The river that goes up to the orangutan reserves. And I try to describe, I try to find those places and put them in my work. I think it's one of those things that makes what I write a little bit different.
Well, I think I agree with you there. I wonder if we could shift gears a little bit here and move on to some talk about marketing. How you see the role of marketing for indie writers in their success or possible success.
How do I see it? I see it as a lot of work, is what
I know about that.
I would say it's probably half the game. I mean, I spend a lot of time marketing my work, and the way I work is while I'm writing a book, I will usually write for 4 to 5 days, stop, and do 1 day of marketing. Every day that I write, I will spend about an hour marketing. So if I write, let's just say for 8 hours in a day, I'll spend another hour doing some marketing. When I finish a book, I usually take about 2 weeks solid, and I do a lot of analysis of how the marketing's going. I redesign my ad campaigns, and of course I publish the book at that point, so it takes me about 2 weeks. And during that time, I don't write at all. Nowadays, I think if you're going to self-publish, and I personally believe that self-publishing is the way to go for most writers, unless you are a top 100 writer, where a publishing house is willing to spend gobs of money advertising your books, you're probably better off doing self-publishing.
Okay, I wonder if you would offer 1 or 2 pieces of advice to aspiring indie writers.
Yeah, my advice would be don't take advice. That would be,
That's different, because everybody's always telling us, you've got to get editors, you've got to get editors. It's very refreshing. I agree with you.
Yeah, I would say I would have 2 pieces of advice. The first and most important piece of advice is that writers write. It took me... I've been writing now for about 30 years, and I don't think that I really sort of hit my stride until the last couple of years. And even now, there's so much I have to learn, and I learn by writing. that's the way this business is. That's the way this career is. If you want to be a writer, just start writing. And write all the time, never stop. I took about a 10-year break in writing in my career, right smack in the middle of it. And that's probably one of my biggest regrets. I wish I hadn't done that. I wish I had just kept writing, because I was getting better and better all the time. And I think it would have, I can imagine if I still had those 10 years and that was part of, my portfolio of books or screenplays, how much stronger it would be and how much more skill I would have developed. So the number one thing I would say is write, and write a lot. The second thing I would say is be very careful when people read your work and give you advice. Very careful. Always ask yourself, what makes me think that this person knows better than me? You are the writer. You wrote it for a reason. You wrote it a certain way for a reason. Some people really like certain types of books. Other people like other styles of books. And if you just randomly pick somebody, you have no idea whether they like the style, except for your mother. Your mother will always like your work. But if you just pick somebody randomly and they read your work, they may like it, they may not. It's funny, my proofreader, the guy that I've sort of settled on and is now proofreading my books, I don't think he likes my work very much. I honestly don't. He's very harsh, and I almost totally ignore him when it comes to advice about story and character and things like that, because that's not his job. His job is to proofread. And I really like the guy. He's very, very smart. But I've just decided in my own life that I write a certain way, and some people are going to like it and some people aren't, and that's okay. When I get bad reviews, and I do get bad reviews, it hurts. It hurts when anybody gives you a bad review. But I get over it really quick because I realize that some people just are not going to like the way that I write or what I'm writing about. Monsoon Rising, my first book, was a pretty violent and graphic book. And
great
I think
pace. Great pace.
Yeah, well, it did have a good pace, that's for sure. But it was very graphic, and I think that turned off a lot of people. It wasn't terrible. I mean, I've read worse, that's for sure. But it just came out that way when I was writing it. I tried to be as realistic and true to what I thought would happen to that particular character, and both the protagonist and the antagonist, and it just came out very, very graphic. My other books are not nearly as graphic as that book, but I knew when I wrote it that was going to turn off, some people, and it did. Overall, it's gotten really good reviews, but every once in a while, somebody just says, "Oh, way too graphic," or way too violent, or whatever, and that's okay. So, what my advice on not taking advice is just be very careful when people give you advice. Don't just accept it. When they say, "Oh, well, I don't understand this character's motivation," always ask yourself, is it really important? I mean, is what they're saying important? I feel that, and this goes back to writers writing, as you write, you're going to get better and better. And the reason you get better is because people read your work and you have this constant feedback that comes to you. If 10, 20 people are telling you the same thing, you might want to look at it. And that's what happens when you write a lot of material. You get a lot of feedback, and that helps you become a better writer. But I think you have to be very careful, especially with editors. And I'm not saying that all editors are bad. I used editors. Well, I didn't use editors. There were people early on in my career that I followed, and I took their advice, and I think it helped somewhat. I also believe that it also damaged the way I wrote because I listened to them too much. When you're writing, you have to find a voice. You have to find a style. And that's yours. And like I say, people are either going to love that or they're going to hate it. Some people are sort of, probably going to be in between. That's writing. So just be very careful when people give you advice. That's what I would say. And be very careful even with editors. And remember, it's your book. It's your writing. You have to take responsibility. Writing is a process. It takes years, decades to become a good writer. And you have to just keep trying and keep learning. And don't deny yourself that process by listening to an editor. It's much better that you find what's wrong with your writing by your own analysis rather than somebody analyzing your writing. Because if they're analyzing your writing, it's their taste, it's their style that they're projecting onto your writing, what they like. Okay? That's not necessarily you. You need to stay true to yourself. There's a great Shakespeare quote that my father always used to say, and it's sort of become my, mantra or motto, and that is, to thy own self be true. This above all things, to thy own self be true. And what it basically is saying is, don't lie to yourself. Understand that you have strengths and you have weaknesses. And don't shy away from the strengths. And don't stop progress because of weakness. You will get better. And as you go, your writing is going to get better and better over the years. You'll be amazed at what you write.
Well, that sounds like a good spot to drop off here. And we've been talking for half an hour solid, and this was really an interesting exchange for me. And I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time out to talk to us. And I'm really wishing you a lot of luck in your new books sales.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.
That's how it's done. Today, David Lee Corley let us in on some surprises about the trials and tribulations of Hollywood screenwriting. His insights into his eclectic breed of visual writing sure sparked my interests. You know what they say, write what you know. My next book will have gritty images drawn from real life. Speaking of the Airmen series, Cookus Reviews says, expertly blending fictional characters and real people, David Lee Corley presents a historical novel that reads like a modern political thriller, full of exciting action, larger-than-life characters, and unforgettable events. And remember, reviews are the writer's lifeblood. Thanks for listening. See you soon on Indie Pub News with Michael Gallagher.